made a good pay offer, but also funding into schools, and happily in the budget we managed to get more funding into schools. So you can have a relationship, and I think when I was Fire Minister I met Matt Rack at the FBU a couple of times as well. Not that was necessarily a productive meeting, but because he's quite a challenging character, but as I say, it's often more complicated, and there are different solutions required for each different area.
The argument about whether it's the government's fault or not, in the end, if it's a public sector dispute over pay, and I know a lot of these disputes are more than about pay, the government is the paymaster of last resort. And Mathew, I know you work in youth services, and youth services have experienced a lot of cuts over the years, and you have to work within a budget, and if the paymaster of last resort isn't going to give you any more money, you either can't give a pay rise or you have to cut staff. As someone once said, there is no alternative.
But there is always an alternative, isn't there? The alternative is engaging and getting to a situation that both sides can agree on. And I'd like to ask Kit, and I agree that Mark Harper appears to be a more serious person than his predecessors, and I appreciate that, and he deals with these things seriously. But I'd like to ask Kit, do you think the government should be more active than it's being in some of these cases?
Well, as I say, I think it varies from industry to industry, and so, for example, in the health service, obviously there is a devolved structure and an independent pay review body that looks at nurses' pay and that has agreed a figure, and the government has agreed to that figure. And once you start departing from that, then you undermine the whole process. We had the same process with policing on transport.
But why doesn't Stephen Barclay, the health secretary, come out and say what you've just said? Because I can't remember seeing a health minister on the media over the past few weeks while this strike ballot was going on. It's bizarre.
Can I just...
We have to invite them on in, but
believe me, we do all the time, and that they, not just this programme, but across the media, there seems to be a blanket decision by Number 10 Downing Street not to put ministers... They don't even do the morning rounds anymore as a matter of routine.
But can I just make the point, though, that this is about strikes. This is a last resort, but this is also about a workforce that is absolutely at the end of their tether. They're at the end of their limit. They are understaffed. They are overworked. And now they are being asked to do it for a significantly less pay due to inflation, but also on the back of years of suppressed pay. So it's not just about... not getting enough pay and the cost of living crisis that everyone is facing. It's on top of years of underinvestment in public services and in our railways. And as someone that travels up and down the East Coast Main Line every week, I know how underinvested. I'm chair of the all-party group on the East Coast Main Line.
Just be grateful you're not on the West Coast.
Well, I know the West Coast is not good either.
Catherine, I'm assuming from that you would give the RMT...
All of this is underinvested for many, many years.
Yeah, but I'm assuming, therefore,
broken. The country's
looking forward,
broken.
Catherine, that you would give the RMT... Hold on. You would give the RMT what they want. You would not modernise the network in a way that...
I'm not in that negotiation room. And I know...
But also little things, like would you agree to 17% for nurses?
Little things. I know that, listening to the negotiations about terms and conditions, that we're talking about serious changes to people's lives, not just their amount of pay, but the way they live their lives and the job that they do and the job that they love and they want to go and do. They don't want to be on strike. But in reality, we've just broken so many of these public services after 12 years. And, my view... We need a new government that they can have some faith in, that we can negotiate in good faith and take us in a new direction.
We need to move on. Somebody has texted this. A Twitter poll on LBC means nothing. LBC is a left-wing station. Well, thanks for that. Thanks for that insight.
It is for part of the morning, Iain.
I'm not going there. It's 16 minutes past 8. Saved by the Bell.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Kit Malthouse, Catherine McKinnell, Amy Hart and Mathew Hulbert with us answering your questions. We have a text question from Kevin in Nottingham who says, should ambulance workers be banned from striking? Mathew.
In direct answer to the question, no, they shouldn't be banned from striking, but it's difficult, and it's especially difficult for me. So in July, my mum fell at home in the early hours. She hurt her ribs when she fell. We got to her. We obviously didn't move because she'd hurt her ribs. And we called an ambulance at 5:01 a.m. and a paramedic finally arrived at 4 p.m. And my dear mum died 2 days later. So, of course, if ambulance workers strike, that is bound to have some impact on what is already a distressed service. But I just want to say this. I feel really sorry for the paramedics who get into that profession because they care for people and they want to help people and they want to get to people in a timely manner. And I think I've been having meetings in Parliament today. I sat in the gallery and watched the health debate that happened today. And I've met tonight with Wes Streeting and earlier today with the Lib Dem spokesperson Daisy Cooper. And I'd happily meet with Tory MPs and ministers too if they wanted to meet with me. And what I've been impressing on people, Ian, is that we need system-wide change, because the issue with my mum partly was that ambulances were backed up at Leicester Royal Infirmary, I've been told by East Midlands Ambulance Service, therefore weren't able to get out to the likes of my mum in a timely manner. And people are suffering, and families, I can tell you, are suffering. And the reason is because we have one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, and people are really hurting. People are dying as a result of this. And so would it concern me that ambulance workers were on strike? Yes, of course it would. But do they have a right to strike? Yes, they do.
Catherine.
Well, I mean, I think that put it very well. I think when you listen to ambulance workers and how hard it is to do the job, how hard it is to be unable to get to treat the people as fast as you would like, to be stuck waiting in hospitals, and it is a whole system problem. And I know that we've had this in my area where the hospitals are stacked up at hospitals and they can't get out, and it's just it's a whole system failure that needs to be addressed. But absolutely fundamentally, the right to strike, as we've discussed, and I think we all agree, it is a last resort. Nobody does it easily. Nobody does it willingly. Nobody does it as a first course of action. It's an absolute last resort, and it's only when they cannot get any change any other way. And I go back to this being something that the government needs to look at and address, because I appreciate there are independent peer review bodies, there are independent organisations, but ultimately the people that hold the purse strings, the people that hold responsibility for our overall healthcare system in this country and hold responsibility for the welfare of the people working in these public services, that from all the accounts that I hear and the people that I speak to are broken currently. It needs to be resolved. So, yes, they should have the right to strike. It's a fundamental right.
Is it a fundamental right for police officers or prison officers? Well, actually, prison officers can go on strike.
Well, I mean, at the moment, I think the focus on trying to prevent people from exerting their voice is not the priority here. I think, as you say, the government should come out, and if they don't think that these people need to have the terms and conditions and the pay that they are asking for, then the government needs to explain why. They need to explain to the country why. They need to explain to this workforce why. Because at the moment, all we hear are desperate voices crying for change and a government that is not listening.
Ranj in Birmingham texts to say, I'm a nurse. Can I have the same pay review body that the MPs have to decide their salaries? Ranj, be careful what you wish for, because I think MPs got a 2% rise this year, and I think the pay review body for nurses was 5, was it?
5, and police was 5, yeah.
And I understand the anger that people, and I've heard it a little bit today, expressed towards MPs, because there's a sense of frustration that the people who are in Westminster making these decisions aren't listening. But I would say direct your anger, and let's direct our voices to the right place, the people who have the power to change this, and that is the government.
But they have accepted the independent review body. I mean, so what... And what more are they supposed to do? What's the point of having an independent review body if you don't accept what they say?
Well, I think in the ambulance service, it is a whole-scale issue. It's not just to do with this immediate pay rise. It's to do with the inability to actually carry out your role because of the NHS being in such crisis. And so the NHS as its entirety needs reform. It needs investment. We need to get these waiting lists down. We need to recruit more people. People are under so much strain.
But is that down to the government, or is it down to the management of NHS England?
No, it's down to the government to put in place more recruitment plan, to put in place more funding, to get the workforce in place so that the people who are doing this job day in, day out can actually get to the end of the day and have done a good job
NHS
rather than
spending over
done
the
the job
last
of 4
12
people.
years has gone up from around 100 billion to 150 billion, when inflation, apart from the last 12 months, has been very, very low. Where has the money gone?
I mean, in terms of where's the money gone?
I mean, an extra £50 billion a year since compared to 2010, and you think, well, how much more money can the taxpayer afford to put into the NHS?
But it's not just about investment.
It's now one in every £6 that's spent goes into the NHS. How much more can go in?
Well, as much as is needed to treat the people in the backlog that we have. I mean, we have so many people waiting for routine operations that are out of work. They could be in work. They could be adding to the taxpayers' coffers.
Right, let's go to Amy.
Waiting lists and people in pain.
I don't think they should be banned from striking because, as we've said, withdrawing your labour is a human right. I do think that hopefully the government will be able to strike a deal before it gets to that point. At the end of the day, everyone that is going on strike is just fighting for a better life for themselves and a better life for their families. Like you said, we've already got a problem with the ambulances. I wanted to have a home birth, and my boyfriend pointed out, because I said, but we're 20 minutes from each hospital. And my midwife said, but we blue lighted. And as my boyfriend pointed out, blue lighted if we can get an ambulance. And so that's been absolutely kiboshed now. So I think it is, like you say, a system-wide issue and it needs to be sorted.
Sensible boyfriend. Kit?
So there are two things to say, really. I mean, first of all, I'm amazed, really, that over the last 30-odd years there hasn't been a kind of no-strike arrangement negotiated with ambulance workers, because they're so critical for people's safety, as Mathew found to his.
But if they can't deliver the patients to the hospitals?
Well, that's the second question I'm coming on to. And if you look at the police, for example, I mean, we did have a police strike back in the 1930s, which was a kind of shocker for the nation and obviously critical to our safety. And since then, the police have not had the ability to strike, but as a quid pro quo for that, their terms and conditions and all this stuff are quite heavily regulated. And obviously they have a 30-year horizon and a pension and all those kind of things to compensate for it. And, I would certainly support an attempt to negotiate a kind of long-term no-strike agreement with ambulance staff, because they are so critical. But there is a structural problem with the ambulance service. And before I was Education Secretary, I was at the Cabinet Office over the summer, and on my risk register, I had ambulances glowing kind of red hot because you could feel the structural problem. And in truth, as you might know, Ian, I had a sort of 16-odd years in city government in London before, and throughout that period the London ambulance service was always struggling, and the structural problem is that they are part of a conveyor belt, and if there's a blockage in the conveyor belt somewhere, then they're unable to do their job. And the blockage at the moment seems to be discharge from hospital. Right, the ability to discharge out into the community, into social care, or what used to be convalescent homes in the past is just kind of, for some reason, clogged up. And that is knocking back. And we see it in other areas. So, for example, the police will tell you that they're spending a lot of time sitting in A&E guarding a mental health case that they have recovered or rescued or gone to find, what they call a MISPER, and they're having to sit for 6-7 hours in A&E waiting because they can't access a mental health bed because one is not freed up because somebody's not released. And so I know that Steve Barclay is looking very sharply at this conveyor belt notion, and that there are lots of hospitals now. I mean, certainly in my part of the country, in Hampshire, there are discharge teams that particularly focus on trying to get people out back in the to create the space the ambulances can deliver people.
If you know that that's the problem, and I think we all agree that that is the main problem, getting patients who are fit to be discharged. I mean, we had Nightingale hospitals in COVID, which were built within like 10 days or something. Is it beyond the wit of the NHS to requisition, I don't know, ex-hotels or something, and put these people in temporary accommodation rather than stay in hospital?
Well, it's not so much as the roof as the support and the other stuff that you need, right? Now, you can go from you've got somebody in a ward that's quite intensively looked after with a high staff to patient proportion. You then go to a convalescent home where it's a bit less because people are less at risk, and then they exit home, and it's that bit that is missing. But you still need the people, and of course we're in the middle of a big government's in the middle of a big I'm not a member of the government now, Ian, but there's the government's in a big recruitment campaign of nurses, doctors, all the rest of it into the NHS. Numbers are up very significantly. I think last time I looked, 34,000 more nurses over the last decade, right? So they're putting lots in, but there is this structural issue, and I think. As I understand it, Steve Barclay is looking at this notion of the conveyor belt and how you unlock these particular
Thomas, when you refer to it as conveyor belt, it's sort of so impersonal.
I know, but that effectively it is a process, right?
I understand. Matthew, do you want to finish off?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, my view is, and this is what I've been saying to MPs today, is that I think this should be considered a national emergency, actually. We can't have a situation where the new normal is that people are waiting 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 hours to be seen. I mean, I shall never forget, harrowing in my mind, what my mum went through in those 11 hours. It's seared on my mind, and that's why I'm absolutely determined to raise the matter. But I think we need cross-party stuff on this. I know we're heading towards an election. I know parties want to make their party political points. We live in a thriving democracy, that's quite right. But this should be kind of above party politics. Let's get together, let's sort the situation out.
Right, we will move on to a new subject in just a few minutes' time. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to take part in our discussion here on Cross Question on LBC. But first, let's get the latest news headlines at 8:30 with Charlotte Morgan.
Downing Street says the decision to call off strikes ahead of Christmas now rests with the unions. The RMT have rejected a pay rise offer and plan to walk out for 4 days next week and from Christmas Eve to the 27th. Pharmacists are warning a blip in the supply chains affecting the availability of some medicines to treat strep A. It's affecting liquid supplies of the antibiotic penicillin as ministers look at handing out prescriptive drugs to schools reporting cases. It's claimed the UK is sleepwalking into a food supply crisis. The National Farmers Unions called for the government to step in to help with rising fuel, fertiliser and feed costs. LBC weather, some showers along northern coasts, mostly dry elsewhere, lows of -3. Wintry showers for Northern Ireland tomorrow, some rain in the west, highs of 5 degrees.
This is LBC. Ask Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:34 on LBC. We have with us Mathew Hulbert, who's a Liberal Democrat councillor and health campaigner, Catherine McKinnell, Labour MP for Newcastle upon Tyne North, and Kate Malthouse, Conservative MP for North West Hampshire, and Amy Hart. Now, it says here, influencer. Now, one or two people on our text accounts have been saying, influencer, what on earth does that mean?
Yep.
What does it mean?
So it's someone with usually a social media platform, but it can be a TV platform as well, who uses their platform to influence people. It can be to buy certain items of clothing, to go on certain holidays. I try and use mine to sort of raise awareness of food banks, social injustice issues, the strikes, etc. But it's basically having lots of people, a sort of captive audience, and using that either for good or for evil.
So is it Instagram your primary
Yes,
means?
Instagram,
And how many
primary.
Instagram followers have you got?
1.1 million.
I've got 11,000. So you're far more influential than I am.
11,000, Ian.
Yeah.
I think I've only got 3.5 or something.
I'm on
not a
TikTok.
lot on
Do you know this
Insta.
program's now on TikTok? You are now
I love
live
TikTok.
on TikTok.
Oh my God, I love TikTok.
Should we just do a video instead?
I'll get you doing all the TikTok dances, then you go
No,
viral.
I did say to them, I'm not
But
doing
Ian,
TikTok
Ian's a bit of an
dances.
influencer. He's
Yes.
trying to turn the world against electric cars.
Yes, he is.
Struggling with electric cars.
Oh, no, don't start that. I'm not. I have handed my electric car back and I've explained the reasons why.
But you have
In a
influence.
very public way.
Very sensitive.
One
about
at a
that.
You know, you are an influencer because my boyfriend wanted an electric car, and I was listening to an old episode of For the Many, and it took Ian like 10 hours to get from Beverley
to
down
Tunbridge
to Wells,
yeah.
because there was no charges. And I tell everyone that story, so you are an influencer.
I'm afraid I have done more than anybody else to put people off electric cars.
I'm an
and
EV driver. I think
I am
they're great.
ashamed of myself. Right, let's go to another call before I get into even more trouble. Cam is in Nuneaton. Hello, Cam.
Near
Good
me.
evening, panel. Hello.
Hello.
Oi.
What's your question?
I wanted to ask, basically, it was how far should the government push with the Operation Get Tough?
That's on the Just Stop Oil protesters, isn't it?
Yes.
Is it really called that,
strike.
Operation Get Tough? They normally have sort of... I mean, this wouldn't have happened in your day in the Home Office, Kit, would it? Because that's a bit of a crass one. It'd be slightly elliptical if you were choosing the title.
Yeah, in normal times, there's a list, so the name is effectively random,
Right.
that it comes out of the thing. So you would have a random name that wasn't necessarily quite as descriptive as they've gone for there. But there's obviously some communications expert has got hold of the project and put that name in. Look, obviously, people have a right to protest, but there are boundaries to it, and I think we've seen in recent months, in fact the last year or so, that in my view that boundary has very often been crossed, to the extent that sometimes lives have been put in danger. I mean, when we've got field protesters strapping themselves to gantries filled with thousands of gallons of highly explosive fuel, and indeed putting police officers who have to go up there and recover them, putting their lives in danger too, I think we can all agree that the boundary has been crossed. And also when they are blocking motorways so that people, even if they are in an ambulance or not, are not able to get to a hospital. I mean, we've seen protests here stopping people get to St Thomas's Hospital. I think most right-thinking people think that is crossing the boundary between my right to go about my business and get to a hospital and all the rest of it, and your right to protest. And so I do think there's a case for there to be much swifter and more severe sanctions against those who are protesting. And in fact, I took a public order bill through the House of Commons when I was policing minister that did exactly that, and brought in new offences. For example, these people tunnelling, again, was a very dangerous thing to do for themselves and for people who have to rescue them, making that a severe offence and increasing the penalties in the hope that we might deter these people from their practices. I have to say, that bill was controversial, opposed by quite a lot of people in the House of Commons and in the House of Lords, but nevertheless, I think deemed necessary, and even more so in the light of the protests we've seen in the last few days. I think we all know, don't we, broadly, I hope, where the line is between protest.
Yes, but we'll all have a different line. That's the thing, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure necessarily we will, actually. I think the vast majority of people, I mean, there are obviously people who support them and think it's, these kind of eco-terrorist tactics are legitimate. But I think the vast majority of people actually think that when you've got people who are prevented from getting to hospital and endangering their lives because of these protests, that the vast majority of people would agree that something needs to be done.
Amy, it was up the workers. Is it up the gantries as well?
No, this is the thing. So everyone has their issue that they're so passionate about. And as much as I would not climb M25 bridges or throw soup over paintings, I mean, they're very creative, these protesters, but they have got us talking. If they'd just gone out with placards and stood outside the House of Parliament, would we be talking about them? We wouldn't. So as much as I do think what they're doing is at best annoying, because they are sort of stopping everyone, they are all very passionate about the issue and they're just trying to get their point across.
But if you look at the numbers, I mean, it's a few dozen people. It's the same faces each time. This is not a mass movement, is it?
No, and I do wonder whether, because they're all very young, well, a lot of them are very young. There are some older ones, obviously, but I wonder whether they've been sort of influenced and there's brainwashed people behind the scenes pulling the strings that aren't going out and gluing themselves to the M25. And, they're the ones that go on, like lighting the fire under them and letting them go.
Catherine, you were nodding during what Kit was saying, I seem to detect.
No, I wasn't agreeing.
Lord, no,
I do think there's a lot of cross-party agreement on the need to prevent the more dangerous and disruptive aspects of these protests. I mean, the most awful story I read was a father and his son that couldn't get to their grandfather's funeral, and it broke my heart listening to that, because the idea that you couldn't say goodbye to your loved ones because somebody glued themselves to the road, I absolutely empathised with that. I do take issue somewhat with Kit's characterisation of the government's measures that they've taken in relation to protesting, because I think they do go too far. I think they are not necessary. I think the police have the powers to deal with this already. I don't think they needed to effectively make all protests that causes a nuisance illegal, and to really put a chilling effect on our freedom of speech and right to protest in this country, which I think is fundamental. But I also disagree slightly with Amy, not that I would ever want to, because I think that Greta Thunberg was incredibly powerful in her very quiet and dignified protest, and I think raised the awareness of the climate crisis and what we need to do to change it in an incredibly effective way. And I think there are many ways you can really be passionate about these issues without preventing people going to work,
so that's the secret.
And without putting police officers in danger.
All protesters need to wear pigtails. That's what you have to do. Mathew.
So this is difficult, isn't it? Because I absolutely believe as a Liberal that people have the right to protest about an issue that they feel passionate about. But equally, if, and this wasn't the situation, but if a protest had stopped, had been the reason that an ambulance couldn't get to my mum when she was lying on the floor after all those hours, I wouldn't be so happy about that protest. And I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier on in regards to striking workers, that protesters have the public sympathy up to a point when they no longer have the public sympathy. And I think we'd just stop oil. I mean, Amy's right that they've got us talking about them, but it's in a pretty negative way, isn't it? No one really talks about them in a positive sense because what they do is so disruptive. And so I think actually you can protest in a way which gets your point over and gets hopefully government and parliament listening without causing such disruption to people that people's lives could actually be in danger because of what you're doing.
It is interesting, isn't it, that when Extinction Rebellion first came on the scene, I remember sitting here or wherever I was broadcasting from, sort of saying, well, this is actually quite a refreshing way of doing it. They seem to be quite innovative, and then they seem to get taken over by, shall we say, some of the usual suspects. And again, it was the same faces that you saw doing the sort of traditional, really disruptive protests, rather than the sort of almost street carnivals that they had at the beginning. I think people rather bought into that, Kit, didn't they?
Well, look, the cause of dealing with climate change is one with which almost everybody agrees, right? And the question is, how do you enthuse a general population to make the different choices in their lives to help the planet? And how do you enthuse politicians to go even further and faster than they already are? You know, we're doing a lot in this country already, in many ways, leading the way, particularly on the eradication of coal. But this crowd seemed to be just so zealous and absolutist in what they want, that they won't brook any sense of compromise with the rest of us. And as a result, I mean, they're turning a lot of people off. It's not very long ago, and you'll remember those people who climbed on top of carriages at Canning Town that were dragged off by ordinary working people that just wanted to get to work. And my worry is not necessarily just
ironic protesting on the most environmentally friendly railway in the country.
Yeah. And then you get into the situation where I forget who that poor woman was who was so frustrated about getting her kids to school that she nudged them with a car and ended up getting done for herself. And so you end up with these very, very tense situations. And I know a lot of people look at footage that's coming from Italy and France where the police are just getting in there and dragging them off and throwing them on the side of the road and thinking, well, you know, we could do with a bit of that. So it's a very difficult.
Speak to my partner, it'd be more than dragging them off the road.
Well, it's a very difficult and challenging situation. While I totally agree, protest is fundamental to our rights in this country, there are boundaries.
Right.
And we're just trying to set where those boundaries are.
I've got 3 questions I want to get through before 9 o'clock, so I'm going to ask you all to be a little bit briefer in your answers in the next section of the programme. It's coming up to 8:45.
LBC, Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
This Harry and Meghan trailer for the documentary. He's all over the place, poor young man, holding his head in agony. Why put yourself through it unless it is all part of the grieving process, Natasha and Putney?
I think it's all about her wanting to be popular, her wanting to make money out of her husband, and they're not going to stop it until they've made their billions.
I want you to talk to Sarah, please, Natasha. She's in New York City.
When I read a British paper and it says palace sources, and it's always negative against Harry and Meghan. If those sources exist, that Harry and Meghan are only responding, you cannot say that they are without consequence to her life.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
Kit Malthouse, Catherine McKinnell, Amy Hart and Mathew Hulbert with us answering your questions. Here's a text question from Mike in Poole. Will your panel have their eyes glued to their TV screens when Harry and Meghan release their new documentary? Catherine?
No. I find it incredibly uncomfortable, all of this. I really find the media frenzy for it quite uncomfortable. Sorry, I know I'm on the media. I think at the heart of this is a very painful family breakdown in the relationship. And I find it incredibly uncomfortable to watch, incredibly sad. It's obviously linked to Harry's mom and what happened with her, and, very painful past, very painful present. And, I get why the public are so fascinated by it, and I get why people will be glued to it, but I won't be.
You see, I agree with every word you've just said, but I will be.
I get that. I get that. I think it's up to people what they do, but I find it really painful. I really do.
Mathew?
So I will be watching it. But I'm part of a minority, albeit a growing minority every day, that believes actually that we shouldn't have an unelected hereditary monarch, that we should have an elected head of state. And I know political parties don't like to talk about it because of how popular the royal family are, but and it's certainly not the Lib Dem policy position, but I'm here just as myself tonight, so I'm going to tell you what I think. And I hope this reveals some of the truth about what happens behind the scenes about our monarchy and brings the institution down.
Okay, Amy, wasn't quite expecting that.
Insurrection on this show.
The Tower of London's only 2 miles down the road.
Exactly. Watch yourself.
I'm heading there shortly. Yeah.
I'd just like to preface this by saying lots of people think that Love Islanders are morons, but I'm an oxymoron because I am a socialist, but also a massive royalist. Like, I love
You're all
the
over
royal
the place,
family.
frankly, aren't you?
I am a mess. I'm a hot mess. And I have
so many ways.
I have a massive issue with Prince Harry. Like, Meghan can, whatever. But two things. Number one, to go on television, global television, in the middle of a global pandemic when people are losing their jobs, using food banks, living in poverty, and say, at 37 years old, my dad cut me off financially and all I have left to live on is the £31 million that my mum left me. Oh, I feel really sorry for you. I'm really sorry about that. And also, my dad lost his mum 8 years ago, and I know how horrendous that was for him. King Charles, he has lost his mum, and whether or not he is the king, whether or not, he had to start a new job the next day, have a bit of sympathy for your dad. At the end of the day, he's still your dad, and he's just lost his mum, and all of this is horrendous.
Good.
I think they should get over themselves. I completely agree with you. I mean, talk about first world problems. There they are sitting in this massive multi-million-dollar mansion complaining about how awful their lives are. I just find it kind of tasteless, really. And so I won't be watching. And I also, to be honest with you, looking behind it, right, all this stuff, they're doing it for money.
Yeah.
Right, it's not like they're trying to do. I mean, when Harry did the Invictus Games and all that fantastic stuff for veterans, right, and when he and William and Kate talked about mental health issues, and they didn't do it for money. This is kind of, as I think somebody said in the Daily Mail today, monetising their misery, and I find it all a bit tasteless, really.
But let's not get pious and pompous about this.
I'm telling you what my view is.
In terms of William and Kate, they recently did their Earthshot thing in America, but didn't fly the winners over. They just flew the celebrities over. I mean, come off it. I mean, so I hope this programme really lifts the lid on this institution, and I really wish that some in political parties would be brave enough to say it's not good enough today. If we shouldn't have an elected House of Lords, if we shouldn't have an unelected House of Lords, which we shouldn't, they should be elected. We should also have an elected head of state, surely, and no political party will ever talk about it. Why not?
Because they're magical.
Because we don't.
Magical.
No, because I think having a constitutional monarch has worked for us remarkably well and provided stability over many decades and decades. And I think it works better than having an elected and therefore partisan president.
Yeah. Oh, it works in Ireland. Come off it. It works in Germany. Of course, it could happen here.
Thing is, we don't actually need to watch the show because it will be everywhere, all over the media. So you don't actually need to waste it. You can literally just read it on your phone.
This is probably going to be the last mention it gets on this programme, I have to say. Right, let's move on to another money-making exercise. Hannah in East Grinstead says, Matt Hancock officially launched his new book, Pandemic Diaries, today. Should he be capitalising off his role in the pandemic? And do you trust his version of events?
No.
Amy?
No, I don't at all. I think he was ridiculous for going on I'm a Celebrity. He's not a celebrity. He's an elected member of Parliament. What about his constituents? He shouldn't have gone on there. And this is like a big glossy autobiography. Is he going to start like doing book signings and things? Like, no, I
imagine
don't
he
like
is.
it. I think that, you know, so many people suffered because of choices he made. And I understand that, on the other hand, he had to make these choices, and every choice you make in life has a 50-50 chance of being the correct choice. But I think, monetising off of other people's misery.
Well, he would argue were he here, but of course he's not here. He's not doing any broadcast interviews on the book, which if I were his publisher, and I very well could have been because it's been published by my old company, I would have been furious with him for not publicising it in broadcast interviews, but he's not. But the money that he's making from this, he says, or at least some of it, is being donated to charities. Now, he hasn't said what proportion, and we will find out how much money he gets from it because it'll be published in the Register Members' Interest. So we can't just assume that he's pocketing the dosh himself.
I think it's all just him trying to rebrand himself. I think he knows that he's like messed up massively during the pandemic, just of like how he used to be in interviews and that like fake crying thing. I think this is him. I'm a Celebrity, followed by the book, is him just trying to rebrand himself as, see, I'm a good guy, really. I'm a good guy, really.
Well, it worked on I'm a Celebrity, didn't it?
It did, sadly.
Kit?
Well, I'm pleased to hear that he's donating the proceeds to charity, and I agree with you. I think it would be a strange thing for him to seek to make a profit out of that thing. So let's see what proportion. Hopefully, it'll be all the money that he makes. And I gather, I understand he didn't actually keep a diary, so it's a sort of, as they would say, a BBC reconstruction of what happened. And as somebody much wiser and more senior than me, Hereditary said, recollections may vary.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed you didn't use the well-worn phrase trusted and valued colleague there. Mathew?
Well, I mean, I just try not to think about the man. I think he's dreadful. I stopped watching I'm a Celebrity when he appeared, which is a great shame for me because it deprived me from watching.
signalling off you.
It's thank you, Ian. I knew you'd say that. But it was quite a sacrifice for me because it stopped me from being able to see Owen Warner, who was my personal favourite.
Enough.
Yeah, thank you. But no, seriously, I mean, I think he shouldn't have gone on there, as Amy says, because what about his constituents? I mean, I appreciate that MPs have office staff, but really his job was to be in Parliament and in his constituency representing his constituents. And I think he needs to choose now between whether he's going to be a celebrity, in which case he needs to stand down from Parliament and go off and do the SAS show and all of that, or
he's actually already done that. That's already in the can.
You know what I mean.
I thought he did I'm a Celebrity instead of SAS. He's done both.
He's actually done that, and apparently
he's going to be all
won
over
it.
Really?
Should I have said that? Is Catherine?
I mean, I think he should give his testimony to the COVID inquiry. Mm-hmm. I think there needs to be a very serious look at what happened during COVID. I don't think it's to be profited from in any way, whether that's PPE contracts for your mates, or publishing a book in order to make money from it. And I don't think that anyone should rely on any one individual's account of what happened during that pandemic. We should have an independent inquiry that give the families that suffered hugely
we have got one,
the comfort
of
that.
If he's not going
of
to...
at least knowing the truth of what happened.
If he's not going to benefit financially from the book, and it does go to charity...
Well, you haven't said, yeah.
Well, I don't know whether... But he said he's giving at least some of it to charity. Isn't it a good thing for somebody to put on the record what they did and why they did it? You may not agree with it, but surely it's a good thing for that to be done.
I think it's too soon. I think this is still very painful for the families. I think we need to conclude the COVID inquiry and see what the facts are, established by an independent body that is looking at it. I think so you
think this is a preemptive strike?
I think it's a preemptive strike to attempt to potentially rewrite history, and I don't think it's his place to do that. I think he should be apologising.
At the end of each of these programmes, we do a fun text question, which usually strikes fear into the heart of everybody, particularly when I don't tell you what it is beforehand. Brandon in Hull says, Matt Lucas is leaving Bake Off. Me and the wife are devastated. Can your panel think of anyone who could replace him? I met Matt Lucas at the Euro finals last year, and he was an absolutely delightful guy. I'd never met him before, and we sort of became friends, and I sort of have been sending him ABBA remixes ever since. bizarrely. Amy, who would you replace him with? apart from
Matt
yourself?
Hancock. No. He's now a reality TV stalwart. No, Miriam Margolyes, obviously.
Oh my God.
She'd be fantastic, wouldn't she?
would. I love her.
Love Miriam.
She's one person I want to get on this show.
Fantastic.
So there you are, Corey. There's a challenge for you. Miriam Margolyes on Cross Question. What could possibly go wrong? Kit.
I think you'd be good on it, Ian. I bet you're a dab hand.
No, I'm not. I can't cook.
But that's what's fun, right? That's what we want to see. A bit of a soggy bottom and all that stuff.
Jackie.
Well, I'm your man
Jackie.
then.
Yeah.
Jackie Smith and Iain Dale on Bake Off.
Yeah, that would be great.
Well, if the producers are watching, we're up for it. Mathew.
Well, you don't look unlike him, Ian, Matt Lucas. So I think...
you're not coming back on
I was
this
going to say, that's me never coming back. But I'm really sad
I'm a foot taller than him.
I'm really sad that he's going, actually, because, he's real fun, him and Noel Fielding. So maybe Sandy Tox will be back. I believe she's been ill. I hope she gets better and maybe she could come back.
Former LBC presenter, Catherine.
Well, I think I'm a Celebrity's completely over now that Man Hancock's been in there. So I think Ant and Dec should get themselves on the Bake Off.
That'd be entertaining. Well, you've all been very entertaining. Thank you very much indeed. Mathew, Hulbert, Catherine McKinnell, Amy Hart and Kit Malthouse. Coming up in the next hour, we are going to talk about smoking and vaping. I'll tell you the question after the news, but we want to hear from you. 0345 6060 973, because smoking is at an all-time low in this country and vaping is on the up. I wonder whether we're just replacing one very harmful addiction with another, well, slightly less harmful addiction. I want to get your views in a moment. What's been your experience of vaping? You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's coming up to the news at 9 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, Downing Street says significant planning meetings are taking place to prepare for a coordinated day of strikes by ambulance workers. Health is just one of many sectors seeing staff walk out this month. Speaking on LBC's Cross Question, Labour MP and former Shadow Attorney General Catherine McKinnell says it's down to Westminster to put things right.
The government need to get to the table and enter proper, good faith discussions to reach an agreement so that we can all get on with our lives. The workers, the public that need these services, and the government needs to get on with growing the economy so we can get out of this mess instead of just fighting with the people that we're relying on to get this country moving.
But Conservative MP and former Education Secretary Kit Malthouse told us their demands come at a difficult time for the public purse.
I mean, the run up to Christmas is a time at which lots of people rely on the rail network to get around and see their families. And of course, they're using maximum leverage to try and get what they can. Do I think it's warranted in the face of whatever, I think 8% that they've been offered? Actually, I don't. No, because the country is short of money.
More than 10,000 members of 3 unions across most of England and Wales will strike on the 21st, and most will do the same again the week after. A group that represents independent pharmacies says members are struggling to get stocks of antibiotics used to treat strep A. As a preventative measure, Professor of Child Health Callum Semple wants antibiotics offered to schools reporting cases.
I think it is quite good news that we're hearing of a more public health approach within schools.